Okay, I want to welcome everyone to the Getting Down to Business panel. And everyone who is here, I just want to say welcome to JemCon, especially if it's your first JemCon. We have a lot of new people here, and I love meeting people when it's their first JemCon. And also, just want to say before we get started, that this presentation is strictly for educational and discussion purposes, and all trademarks and copyrighted images are properties of their respective owners. Just in case we have
spies.
Yes. Alrighty. So, was anyone here last year for the Getting Down to Business panel? Okay. So I'm trying to. Some of the stuff will be a little bit familiar, but some of it will be a little different as well. Wanted to have some newer stuff also, so it's not the exact same presentation as what we had last year. So kind of just a quick backstory on how like this whole presentation idea came together. So many people talk about like, oh, we want more gem merchandise and this and that and the other thing, and that's all great, and I'm totally with you, but just want to get kind of into the behind the scenes stuff of what is really involved on the other end of things, trying to get licensed merchandise to market, whether it's the Gem comics or the doll, or there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into it. So really quick, just want to do a quick overview of 3 basic things to keep in mind that'll come up throughout the presentation. So there's 3 concepts: patent, copyright, and a trademark. Anyone who's studied business probably is familiar with these, but just to kind of go through those different examples real quick. So a patent is really for an invention, and you can have a design patent or a utility patent, and the design patent is exactly what it says, a design patent, versus the utility is more a functional aspect of a product. And there's 2 different, the design patent lasts for 15 plus years, the utility patent would be 20 plus years. So an example of that would be if Emmett Benton actually made the Gemstar earrings, he would probably have put a patent on it. And then he would want to renew it, obviously. Copyright would be any original written works of authorships, whether that's a script, a song. So all of the original copy, the scripts from the Gem and the Hologram show, all of the original music, that would fall under this aspect. So a lot of people have been like, why can't we have all the songs come back and put on a CD? Well, there's copyright restrictions involved with that. And the duration restrictions on that are the life of the author plus 70 years. So there was actually a thing recently where some of the copyrights for Walt Disney were going to expire, and there was a big issue with that. So that's copyright. And then the trademark really is protecting the overall Gem and the Holograms, like brand name and the logos, anything like that. So all the merchandise that we have. And in theory, they don't really expire, but you'd have to keep them active, essentially, in the marketplace. And any additional merchandise that comes out needs to have kind of its own trademark filed. So you need to have like a separate licensing agreement on file for the comics versus the clothing versus that stuff. So all this merchandise that's come out in the last few years, there's a lot of behind the scenes work that goes into making sure everything's kosher, on the business side, before fans like us can go out and actually buy the merchandise. So real quick, this is terrible. So one of these years we're gonna have better light. So I'm just gonna kind of.
If we turn off the light, would that make it more? Would that help us read it better? Can we do that?
Maybe. Would that help?
I don't know. Hold on.
Can we like brighten the projector?
Hold on. I'm gonna see what this does, guys, because I don't know. I'm an electrical genius, guys. There you go.
Wow! Thank you very much. So, and as soon all right. And I guess when it gets time to Q&A, we can turn the lights back on.
Want me to put the lights back on?
No. When it's time for Q&A, so we can actually see everyone. So okay. So you'll see here. There's actually, this was a search that was done recently on the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office website for, yes, I actually did that, for all of the active and dead requests for any merchandise related to Gem and the Hologram. So I'll kind of just walk you through some of these just to kind of show, this is basically behind the scenes. This is what's been going on with the Gem brand for the last 10 years. So you'll see in the middle, which one is up? So the comic books, it was originally filed back in 2000, it was first filed in June of 2003. And so that means that someone on Hasbro's end was trying to get Gem and the Holograms type comic books out to the market. It was first filed in 2003 and then it went dead. And then there was another one filed in August of 2008. And by the time we finally got the comics now, it looks like April 2012 and December 2015, which I think is about when the comics came out. So it wasn't the first time that they tried to get the comics out into the marketplace. There were a couple of attempts with that. Also, with the dolls, we all know we have the Integrity dolls that are out right now. That was first filed in May of 2008. And then that went dead, and then there was another request filed in January 2012, and then now it's been active since it looks like August of 2013, which I think is when Hollywood Gem came out. So just to kind of show you, it's not always, and especially too, the licensed property has to be a priority for whoever owns it. So Hasbro or whoever was doing this may have wanted to go and said, oh, let's go and do this, and then they didn't really have the resources to actually move forward with it, so then the request kind of deactivates, so to speak. And then they have to go and do it all over again. And then the other thing, we did comic books, we did dolls, there was one other one I wanted just to point out, I'm trying to find it. Oh, there is another one, the clothing and the costumes also. So just to kind of show you, for example, the Sephora makeup that came out last year or the year before that a lot of people got, they were actually different filings that needed to be made specifically for that. So, and it just depends on how it's categorized. So for example, hair dye / makeup is a separate category compared to what the compact would have been, because the compact would have, the mirror rather, would have ended up in a different category for licensing purposes. And then obviously we had like the Manic hair dye. So all of this is great for us, the fans, but there's just a lot of behind the scenes stuff that goes into that, and a lot of it's kind of dictated at the federal level. So this basically behind the scenes is what has been going on with the Gem and the Holograms brand. And it was interesting to see there were a lot of things that were filed, presumably I think to match up with the movie that came out. I think based on what I saw, it was obvious that they were trying to have some new merchandise come out to match up with the movie, but then the movie wasn't successful, so some of those requests they didn't move forward with it. But on the left, these are all of the active requests. So in theory, we could see additional merchandise along these lines. Costume jewelry from first filed a few years ago. Also bath linens and sheets. I really want a Gem and the Holograms sheet set, so hopefully that will stay active. So yeah, this is what it was. The third one, under 8 live requests, it says backpacks, purses, luggage, keychains, cosmetic bags. So the compact would have been considered a cosmetic bag, which is totally separate from hair dye and makeup. So just a lot of fun facts for you to see all the TLC that goes into your Gem merchandise. And then this is also just kind of, and I want to thank the Totally Gem Magic site for this info. This was kind of, and if anyone was here for Gina Beebe's presentation, this was a lot of the stuff that she talked about. just kind of what they were anticipating for the Gem brand when all that merchandise first came back in the 80s. So the show originally aired October 1985. The Gem toys were unveiled at the New York Toy Fair a couple of months later in February 1986. They had projected, Hasbro had projected that Gem would make $30 million a year in sales, which is pretty impressive considering this was like 30 years ago. And it was the 10th most popular toy line in 1986. There were some issues though that went into really having it be successful and stay successful commercially. So the dolls were very different obviously than the Barbie dolls that were out there at the time, which a lot of people loved, that it was more realistic body types. But then thinking about it from a merchandising perspective, there's only so much shelf space in a store. So none of the accessories that would work for a Barbie would work for Gem and vice versa. So now there's twice as much real estate that's needed to house Gem and the Holograms merchandise in a store. There was also the packaging. There was a lot that went into the packaging. We know we've seen a lot of Sharon Nettles, really great artwork. She was commissioned to do portraits for a lot of the artwork on that. A lot of the packaging was also different. We're going to get into that in the next slide. There was also flashing earrings, cassette tapes, all of that. There's a cost associated with that. So that, in theory, probably cut into the profit margins for Hasbro. And also, too, the boxes, we'll get into it in the next slide, the boxes were very different than what was in the store at the time as far as other mass merchandise dolls that were out on the market. They were a lot bigger, so it made it difficult. It ate up more shelf space. And then, of course, there were a lot of ancillary characters that weren't made as a result. They were going to come out with the Stingers and Astral and Regine, and we weren't able to see that. So just kind of, I don't want to go and turn the lights on just yet, but just any thoughts, you can kind of just shout it out. Any thoughts on the packaging that you're seeing here? Anything that kind of stands out or?
It's quite excessive.
It's amazing.
It's that, but like that whole jutting. I mean, I'm thinking from a business perspective because that's really what this whole panel is about.
I
so
love
yes,
it
is beautiful, but that whole like jutting out piece, it just seems like unnecessary.
Right. So, go ahead.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
For some of the shelf space concerns, the box that has dance in it would be better than the box that has Stormer in it because the additional flap is still supposed to be seen, but there's nothing actually there in terms of what you might actually buy as a product. And so Dance's box, just having her being visible in that picture, made for a better use of whatever available shelf space there was, instead of the flap on the side.
However, if memory serves, aren't those boxes kind of triangular shaped?
Yes.
They were.
It's not as easy to stack them or like.
Yeah, so
place them
that's
on
a
the
really
shelf.
good. That's a really good point. So the Stormer box with the flap, Gina Beebe actually, I think, even talked about that. They wanted to showcase obviously the artwork that they'd commissioned Sharon Nettle for, but then they were designed actually to be stackable. I would need to have two boxes with that same packaging to kind of show it, but the Stormer boxes, that packaging with the flap, they were meant to be stackable to maximize shelf space. But then what's tricky with that is you're not seeing the full packaging when you're stacking them. Some of the packaging is going to get cut off. And what I just thought was interesting too, so you can see the bottom left corner where you've got the holograms and it's just the dolls. They weren't able to, it just got really expensive with the packaging. So they stopped with Sharon's artwork and then they just had regular pictures of the dolls. And then also what I thought was interesting, I'm not a doll expert by any means, Liz would know more than me, but some of the dolls even on the right, like it didn't seem as consistent as it could have been from a brand perspective. So trying to go and you're just a kid, you're trying to find, Gem merchandise, amongst all of the other stuff that's out there. You've got a really thin doll for Bonnie, a very thin doll for the Rock and Curl Jem. You've got a flap for Stormer, a flap for Kimber, no flap for Dance, and no artwork on the back for whatever that doll was. So it was just kind of, you can kind of see where, and granted this was 30 years ago, but I think it's interesting to kind of, and also too, just from a packaging perspective, having a vendor that can, you know, quality control, regularly source that stuff. So just, I wanted to kind of share.
It's also a perfect example of the progression of them trying to cut costs.
Absolutely.
Like the ones on the right were the later years where they're,
Yeah.
it wasn't selling as well, so they reduced the packaging by quite a bit.
Right, because that all, I mean, we all love Jem, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to money. And we were even told, I forget what year it was, a few years ago, one of the panels, that they changed the theme song midway through, and it had to do with money. That it was cheaper for them to have that Me and My Friends or Jem Girls compared to the original theme song. So at the end of the day, unfortunately, it does come down to money. They need to be profitable with what they're doing. And then this is just kind of a recap. I'm sure everyone's familiar with this, but some of the recent merchandise that we have had the last few years, it's been really exciting because I know just talking to people at JemCon, it's gotten some new Jem fans on board, with the show being on, what is it, The Hub? And we've had Jem has been on Netflix. We've had actually, so the Shout Factory DVDs came out in 2012, but I know prior to that, they had individual seasons that were released with Rhino, and they kind of were out, and then I think the licensing on that didn't get renewed, and then all of a sudden it was like $150 on eBay just to get season 1 of Jem, you know, with Rhino. It was so, and then we had obviously Spirit. We had those Halloween costumes come out, and Hollywood Jem came out in San Diego Comic-Con at a $130 price point, sold out rather in 2 days. And then what's really exciting now is we are starting to see, the diehard fans are starting to see some of those collectibles with characters that weren't produced previously, like Regine, Astral, the Singers, all of that. So this is kind of what's been going on recently. And then this is some newer stuff that I wanted just to talk about that was not in the panel discussion last year, to kind of show just, it's not unique to Jem, and it's not, you know, a lot of people get very passionate about Jem and like, oh, she wasn't given a fair chance, and I totally agree with that, but it's also, there's larger issues within the toy industry and also the retail industry now. So this was, I'm pretty sure everyone here was familiar with the whole new Barbie line that came out last year, where it was the realistic body sizes. You had plus size Barbie, you had petite Barbie, you had tall Barbie. Everyone loved it. They're like, oh, this is great. This has been overdue for years. But what was interesting, this was also a very, can anyone think of any problems from a business perspective with having all these new Barbie types come out?
For every model, you need a different dye.
Yeah.
Like to print, not print them, but for the plastic to fill the molds. That's the word I was looking for. You need all these different molds for all the different body types and face types and, you know, different hips, different shoulders, different legs. All of those have to be different if the doll body types are different.
And then Minx.
I am actually more of a Barbie person than Jen person, so I've been keeping track.
Oh yeah. It's okay. The lights are off. We can't see who you are.
Producing outfits for all the different sizes. However, the stores don't actually carry the other sizes for the new body types. I have seen 2 petite outfits in one Walmart once. Other than that, I've only seen the original type outfits. And so it's just too hard for a lot of stores to carry all of the sizes of everything because it's, you know, ordering separate cases.
Right.
I've also thought about that too. Like,
Yeah.
a particular fashion. Let's say you have a doll that is noted as plus size, but you buy a fashion for it that's petite. and then you get home and it doesn't fit the doll, you have to take it back, just like you buy like real clothes at a store. Are they gonna,
Oh, yeah.
Are they gonna take it, or, you know, you have to keep it because you bought it, or is the return policy on the clothes that don't fit the doll? I mean, you know.
I feel like they're so, it's almost like it's customizable that there's so many different types.
Right.
And you can find the one that's like you, but then at the same time it's like, I don't know, it's like you don't have a character that you can like,
Right.
you know what I mean? Like there's just, instead of like having 5 characters, you've got so much stuff that you're just like, it's too excessive in a way.
Right.
So I guess too, how do the retailers place orders? Do
So-
they have to accept just
Man,
a whole
like, can sell
shipment,
better than-
or?
That's a really great question. So we actually, with my last job, I got to work on this a little bit indirectly. So before the toys ended up in the stores, they did like a field test where they were only available online through the Mattel toy shop. And that was, so I worked for a company in my last job that handled a lot of the like online interactive content, where if you buy any product online and then there's a section where it says this information provided by the manufacturer, that was my old company, and that vendor kind of syndicated that content out. So we housed, Mattel was one of our clients, and we actually housed a lot of the creative assets for all of these dolls when they came out, and we syndicated that content to the Mattel toy shop online. And what was really interesting about it is it was very smart on Mattel's end, because even though they're a huge brand, I mean, Barbie is an iconic brand, so you would think Barbie would be able to negotiate being able to get all the shelf space, but like we've said, there's only so much shelf space available. So what they did was they kind of did a field test with the sales. The toys were only available initially online through the Mattel toy shop. And then based on the dolls that did really well with the online sales, those were the ones that made it into the stores. So I thought that was really smart, because it was a way for them to kind of gauge initial interest for what dolls were selling, which ones weren't. And then it also helped them to buy some time before they were able to get the dolls into the store. Because a lot of the dolls were already produced, but they just couldn't get through to the retailers. And then obviously I put this presentation together before, Toys R Us just announced bankruptcy and all that stuff. So there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that goes into this merchandise. And I see a hand in the back.
Yeah, so I work for a local toy collectible manufacturer, and basically we sell to the retailers, we don't sell to the customer base.
Yeah.
And we're constantly told by the retailers, females don't sell very well, POC doesn't sell very well, we want mostly males, and when they get exclusives, they want limited piece counts, they want low MOQs and not high MOQs. Like, it's estimated
minimum order.
So it's really difficult because you don't sell straight to your customers. You can do all the media fan polls you want, but if you base it off of that, the retailers won't buy it.
And what's interesting too, I really appreciate that perspective. And what's interesting too, the retailer needs their cut also, right? So if you're gonna go and push it, and so it was really smart for them pushing it through their shop, because they controlled, or just the online website, they minimized all of the costs associated with the retailer getting their cut. It also helped them to buy time, and they had their own, warehouse ready to go. But it's very.
At the end of the day, it's about our company making money too.
Exactly.
The licensor gets money, the retailer gets money. It costs money to produce it, and I think our minimum order quantity on brand new things we've never done is 30,000, and you don't know if that's going to sell or not for fandoms that have kind of been in the past or things like that. So.
Yep. So, sorry. There's been a lot of controversy about Mattel ripping off the Hasbro, and
Well, that's originally what Barbie and
and the Rockers was supposed to be.
Yes,
Yeah.
right, yeah. Mattel had their shot at a music-based doll group based on Jem and the Holograms, and that's where Barbie and the Rockers came from.
So like the doll on the left is one of the newer plus size Barbie dolls. And as you can see, there's been a lot of controversy that she's a rip-off of the new Stormer in the comics.
That's the
Oh, there's like an old legend pretty much that says.
That's Kirby Barbie. That's Kirby Barbie on the right with the blue hair, and then that's Stormer in the new Jem and the Holograms comic. So take it for what it's worth. And then just wanted to talk quickly about stuff going on with, obviously we know the license for the Jem dolls with Integrity is coming to a close this year. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I've actually been in touch with Alon Tremblay, who's the marketing creative director at Integrity, who oversaw a lot of the creative stuff for the Jem dolls, and I'm really trying to get him to come to JemCon next year because I think that would be an awesome I think he would be a great guest. So just wanted to talk about, everyone loves kind of these higher quality dolls, and it's great. But then there were a lot of people too who said, oh, it would have been better if they just had like mass merchandise, like, you know, $14.99, $9.99 type price points, which from a budget aspect is great. But I was just kind of curious opening it up. You can see on the top kind of the progression of the, you know, Jem then versus Jem now, and then also just with the holograms. Some people said they liked the original dolls better, some people like the Integrity dolls better. I'd be curious to do a poll on how much everyone spent on their Integrity dolls. Probably a couple of mortgage payments, I'm sure. But, and then getting into the comics, and what was interesting too with the comics, because these are all like, we're not going to have, and I think that's what most fans are very mindful of this, but there's a few like diehard fans that are just very kind of not out of the box thinkers and just want Jem to be exactly how it was in the 80s, you know, and that's great, but it's not really realistic. So like what we've had recently with the comics, I think personally is great because it's kind of bringing Jem into the modern day. And we've had, there's a lot of controversy with some of the body types and this and that, but it's a modern day interpretation from one artist's perspective. And then also too, I think it's very interesting, you know, comparing kind of the creative with, and Jetta was very controversial. Maybe we could talk to Louise about that, because in the comics now she's black, and in the original cartoon, obviously
she was intended to be though.
Yeah. So I wasn't aware of that. So it's very interesting. But you can still kind of see, I think, in the writing, the essence of the characters coming through. And also too, I think with the comics, they were able to give us something new without completely, you know, without deviating completely from the original Jem characters that we grew to love so much. And then also the Stingers too. I will admit I'm very behind on the comics, but it was interesting too because Rhea originally came out as a member of the Stingers, and so it's interesting to see kind of the new perspective in the modern day. And I think too, it's with the comics are doing really well. The movie obviously didn't do well. The dolls, for the most part, did pretty well. But I was just curious, opening it up to why people here in the group think that the comics, because the comics even have like a spinoff now with the Misfits. So there's obviously Jem and the Holograms fans out there, and the comics are doing really well. So just kind of opening it up to the group, why do you think the comics are doing so much better? Allie?
I think it's got to be the low price point. I think so
Yeah.
many of the new products have been inexpensive accessible due to price point for a lot of people, I think. It's like I was seeing in the other panel just sort of towards the end of the discussion is that if you're a kid or a young person, like, are you going to be able to afford the Integrity dolls? Are you going to be able to afford like the clothing line that Shopkop did that was really expensive? But everyone can pretty much afford to get in on these comics. You know, they're a regular price point. You can get one under $5. You know, they are available in a store I can walk into. That's huge for me. I was just thinking throughout your slideshow. How shopping experience has changed, except for the tiny, you know, little release of a few of the Integrity dolls that were available in a Canadian retailer. We have to do all our doll shopping online. That takes away sort of that experience where I remember as a kid, even if I went into the store and I wanted to get this doll, I'm looking at 4 of them in front of me and I'm going to compare which one, her hair looks the nicest, her clothes are looking good. We don't have that, so sometimes we get sent a doll and we're like, oh, like,
She has a wonky
her
eye.
eyelash. I couldn't compare and choose the one that was mine. So I think there's an experience that was really unique and amazing when the comic book came out, that I could walk into a store in my neighborhood and buy a Gem product.
Awesome. And then there was a hand in the back.
Yeah, I think too, comic books tend to appeal to a broader age group. I mean,
That's true.
you're getting everyone from, 8 years old to, on up. I started buying comic books when I was really small. My parents would just turn me loose. So it's like, I think that's a big part of it too, because you can get a bigger, broader audience.
Minx?
Yes?
No, the other Minx, sorry. She had her hand up first.
Like, I'm an avid reader of the comic book series, and it's doing a lot of things that you don't find in other series right now. Like, there are not a lot of female-led titles, and there aren't a lot of titles aimed at women necessarily.
Yeah.
And also, a lot of the ones that are very off, the beaten path indie things. And this is a big title from, not like Marvel or DC, but still a fairly large publisher, meaning it's easy to find, it's very bright, very colorful. They've had a great cast of artists because they've got Sophie Campbell, Emma Viacelli, Meredith McLaren. They're all fantastic indie artists as well, which is great because it's not that American comic book look.
Right.
And so I think it really stands out from the rest of the pack as well, like as more of an indie title.
And there was another hand in the back on the
I
left.
think it's what everyone else is saying, but also because Gem is a great story with great characters, and the new generation has figured that out, so I think that's what they feel.
Awesome. Alana.
Okay, I think the diversity is appealing to a wide spectrum of people. I think it's even that they introduced a trans character is like completely progressive, and I think that it might people that I don't think that's really represented in a lot of comics at all in media. People, it's reaching an audience that might not even have heard of Jen, but they're like, oh, a trans character? That's so cool. I will buy this comic because I want to support.
Rapture.
No, it's a new character was introduced named Blaze,
Yeah.
who is a friend of Clash. I'm also glad they gave Clash a life outside of the Misfits. Like, I'm a Clash fan, so.
And then, yep.
Yeah, I think that's what, I'm not a really big comic book fan, but what impressed me so much about the comics was the content. And it's, when you think about the cartoon, there's so, like, everything that they touch upon is so particular to 1985 to 1988 in terms of how they talk about diversity, how they talk about global politics, how they talk about fashion and music, and all of this. It's such a particular time capsule. They've managed to incorporate so many non-mainstream things, but like LGBT folks and people of color and all of this stuff in a 2017 comic in a kind of a cute, creative way that is female-led driven. Like it's impressive that it's doing so well, but it really translated the essence from what it was in the 80s to what it is now, that the movie didn't really do very well.
We talk about the song lyric sequences though.
Yeah, that was interesting seeing how they did that, because in the cartoon it was obviously you had the songs, but then in the comic it was a little different. But I thought personally what was smart on both ends was that with all of these different variant covers, IDW was really creating different revenue opportunities for Hasbro because a lot of the fans wanted to have all these different covers. And like Allison said, they were low enough price points to where people could afford all of these different covers. It wasn't like, okay, you want to have this doll, it's $150. You know, it was for $3.99. Okay, I'll get 2 covers. I'll get both covers. And it also allowed for different creative interpretations. So it wasn't just like, oh, this is the new gem that came out. It was, here's like 4 different versions. And maybe there was one that you didn't like, that didn't click with you, but there was another one that did. So it kind of didn't matter if the other one didn't click with you. And I also think one thing that's really smart that they've been doing is they have the forum in the back of the comics where fans can write in and talk about what they like, what they don't like, that kind of thing. So it really is kind of a two-way street, very interactive. Yeah?
I wanted to also point out that all of the creators who work on it, a lot of the artists as well as the main writer, Kelly Thompson, are very, very conversational with fans online. And so, like, I've talked personally with several of them, and also all of them are true fans. Like, Rama Llama appears in the comics. Not even kidding, there's like a page where there's just the pink llama in the stable.
That's awesome.
Like they're really good at incorporating references fans would get. Even like there was a band that appeared on an album cover on the wall in the background of one of the picture books, and that is a band that Aja has a T-shirt of in the comics. Like they're really good at incorporating references to Gem media.
Yeah, Rapture.
I think IDW did a really good job actually putting it with everything else that was like their top sellers. Like, I don't know how other comic book shops laid it out, but the local ones I go to, it's kind of like DC, Marvel, and then IDW. And IDW put it right up there of like a bunch of copies, right next to their bestsellers, and they didn't put it on the bottom shelf. They didn't try to hide it. They just really wanted it to sell.
Yeah.
And can I also say,
Yeah.
I was speaking with, I think it's Sophie Campbell, and she was mentioning that she was collaborating regarding the character of graphics. She actually spoke with Christy Marks, and that she was using, like they were sort of collaborating, so she was using some of Christy's ideas. And that, to me, is like the best thing ever, because who doesn't want Christy Marks in some way back with Gem?
Right.
Especially with it's like a character that was supposed to be, you know, released in shell in the doll, and having Christy have input on that is amazing.
Absolutely. And one of the, I don't want to say controversial, but I can't think of a better word, the whole, you know, Kimber and Stormer thing being a couple, that was very interesting because there were a lot of people who thought that they were kind of a match on the show, and then kind of just exploring different different relationships, different backgrounds, and it is very true, I think, to you can the original essence and heart of Gem is definitely, I think, captured in the Gem comics for sure. And then also, just want to talk real quick. I know this is going on now like 2 years, and we do actually have someone here who was able to sit in on the set at the Gem movie, Mr. Mike. So I would love to just kind of talk briefly about kind of the movie and why, you know, why we think the movie maybe didn't do as well compared to the comics, and kind of what next thoughts are. Mike, I'd love for some input from you on that. Mike was actually, when they opened up fan auditions and what kind of thing, Mike was actually able to go and visit the set while the movie was getting filmed.
I think like everybody on the movie had good intentions. I think the script was long and the budget was low, and that I think they did their best with the resources that they had. I was thinking about what's the difference between the comics and the movie, and why are the comics like such a good touchstone, and I think it was what Alana was saying earlier, that Gem was a narrative like in the 80s about inclusion and about different groups of people coming together. And the comics are pushing that narrative forward and including more people in that narrative. And the movie was very, like, kind of self-contained. It was very insular and introspective, and it didn't really reflect the way that the world has changed as much. It focused on social media, which is sort of like a red herring in the whole narrative of how our society is progressing. So that was kind of how I felt about it. But I was really proud to be part of it just because it was fun. And I think that the 4 actors in particular are wonderful actors, and they did, and they're very talented young women. So it was nice to see them at least get an opportunity like that.
I know there was also some controversy with the actress who was cast to play Shayna, that they were saying, some people were saying she wasn't dark enough compared to the original character Shayna in the cartoon, and a lot of stuff like that. And there were some people who were sending her messages, and so it was very interesting. There's a lot of very passionate.
I kind of think too, like that picture that you have up there on the left was one of the earlier publicity photos that they put out. And just looking at it now, it's just kind of like, you know, like there was so much that they did in the movie that they could have used in the publicity. That would have appealed to us, and then you know, a newer group of people too. But it's like you're looking at that, and I know a lot of people, a lot of comments online, like, that's not Jem, that's not Jem. I mean, she's got that
Face thing.
The makeup that Allie loves so much. And, you know, they're all wearing black, and it just does not. And they're all just kind of standing there like,
I think also,
Go ahead.
I think also, as I had shared in the prior panel, if you were in there, one of the reasons I think that the Jem movie did not do as well as it could have, maybe with or without being compared to another media, was that the movie, the characters in the movie are like, you know, 16, 17, 18, and in the cartoon, they were, you know, early 20s, maybe mid-20s. And even though there isn't a large age difference between late teens and early 20s, there's some maturity that happens in those years sometimes. That when you're 22, 23, you're not concerned about the same things as a 17 or 18-year-old might be. So when the age of the main characters was reduced by that increment, it changed what was important to them and what their objectives would be. And that took away from a lot of what Jem fans were expecting to see in a movie, finally, about Jem. It was pitched to the wrong audience. That's the bottom line of why I believe that it didn't do as well as it could have, with or without being compared to any other medium.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think they really captured the essence of the character Kimber. I think that was kind of spot on. It was interesting with, you know, Erica Raymond and, you know, Rio being her son, and that was a different perspective. But Aja was kind of interesting. You know, there was a line where she was like, I can't go back to juvie, and I was like, what? Like, so it was I really liked, though, I don't know if I'm in the minority with this, but I really liked the soundtrack of the movie. I mean, we had last year, hopefully tonight we'll have a repeat. Last year at JemCon, we were playing like Young Blood on the dance, and everyone was on the dance floor, and I think it was just a little, scattered, and compared to like the My Little Pony movie that's coming out right now, and I think it was G.I. Joe, like they had a lot more resources to work with. Christy even said that too. A lot of fans were really upset that Christy wasn't involved in the movie, and they're like, oh, you own Jem, how come you're not? And she's like, no, I don't own Jem. She's like, I was hired as a writer by Hasbro to write this content, and I don't own that content. You know, Hasbro owns the license for Jem. They can do what they want for it. But I do think they missed the mark, no pun intended, you know, by not bringing Christy into the picture, because she really knows the true essence of the show. And she also too, some people I'm sure have read the the movie script that was never produced back in the 80s with the whole entropy thing. But so it just, yeah, it was interesting, and hopefully we'll have, and I think too, it brought Gem to the light, mass market again, but it kind of, in a negative way, just because there was so much backlash. So I think that's a shame.
Yeah.
But there was
Rachel,
Becky.
So I feel like, interestingly enough, I think I kind of like disappeared from the gem world, when I went to college, got a job and all that, and then I think Chris was the one who actually found out they were doing a gem movie, and I'm just kind of flashing back, remembering this, and I was like, oh, I'm so excited, this is so awesome, and my immediate thought is going back to Gem as to what it was when I was a kid and thinking, oh my God, we're going to pick up right where we left off. This is so cool. I can't wait to see what the movie's about.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think we went to our first JemCon in 2015 and Christy Marks was there and people were talking about the movie and that like blew my mind. I was like, oh, it's going to be nothing like I thought it was going to be. But then at the same time, Christy was like, go give it a chance. Like, I know this isn't what you guys are, hoping it would be, but keep an open mind. And so then we went and saw it, and there were a couple of things that like obviously stood out to me. I think as a fan, the biggest thing that disappointed me is I was like, where are the Gemstar earrings? There are no Gemstar earrings. Like I could let go of everything else, but there were no Gemstar earrings. And then I think when we got done with it, we really enjoyed the movie, but I was like, you know what, if they had just not called this Gem, I think everyone would have been a lot happier. And if they'd even said like, Jerica's kids grew up or something like, something
I like that, yeah.
It kept the Gem stuff alive, but it was like going forward as opposed to like calling it Gem and then it not clearly being Gem.
Match up with the established idea of what the brand had been.
Yeah, it's
so people that
exactly.
already familiar with it had a disconnect, and people who were introduced to it kind of didn't maybe get an introduction to what we have
really,
now, especially the comics probably being the most common touch point for like a mass market type perspective.
But like I've been curious if like I didn't know what the name of the movie was, I wonder if I would have thought like what I would have thought of it,
Well, that's a good point too, and I know it was mentioned last year when we had this discussion that, and I didn't even realize this until it was mentioned. They had in the movie they had when they were like in the garage and trying on clothes, that those outfits were like the second edition fashions basically that they were trying on. I didn't pick up on that at all, so you can tell like there was some TLC that was put into the script and the development of the movie. But then I think where the missed opportunity is there's only the really like diehard Gem fans are gonna pick up on that, just like we would pick up on like what Emma Kate was saying in like the comics with Aja's concert shirt and Rama Lama and all of that stuff. So the diehard fans are gonna pick up on that, but the diehard fans are a small, you have kind of, I think with any major brand, you have different levels of fandom and engagement. You have the diehard fans that are going to go to like a JemCon and that kind of thing and really scrutinize that stuff. Then you've got other fans who are like, oh yeah, I love Gem, but they would probably bomb at trivia. Like they just weren't as engaged. So you have to kind of keep that in mind if you're trying to pull in as many people as possible. Those little tributes, like the second edition fashions and all of those things, that stuff's great, but it can't be like a standalone thing. You need to really have something that clearly establishes this as Gem.
I felt disconnected from what it was.
And with synergy too. I think there was a little bit of a missed opportunity with the robot. I loved the backstory with Emmett Benton and her dad and all of that. I mean, I really, truly like that. But I agree with the earrings. I think if they had just had the earrings. Some people even said just with the makeup. They're like, if she just had the same makeup as what Gem had, that would have been enough. And I'm like, yeah. So it's interesting because you have new people coming into it who don't know Gem from a hole in the wall. You've got the diehard fans from the 80s. You have to kind of try to appease, to the masses, sort of.
I think it goes back to what you said with the boxes, even though about being a kid and saying all the different boxes change, you know, for the dolls, like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like what they did with the movie. They changed everything about Jem, and so now it's like, it was, although it had the storyline and different things that we recognize, it was still kind of like uncharacteristic of what we once knew.
I was gonna say, I think one of the hugest things that we haven't touched on is the fact that Misfits weren't in that movie.
Yeah.
And that was like the biggest rivals, like the antagonist of the entire premise. Like that just seemed totally innate.
But with the ending of the movie, like,
Yes.
if it had been successful, we would have
I know it was. That was the best part.
It would have.
So I was
Jump in
gonna,
a little bit on that.
I wanted to jump in because I actually talked to John Chu on the set, and I think that was his idea, was that he wanted to reset the movie for this new generation, and then in the second movie it would more closely follow the Jem storyline, because you would have the Misfits in it, and she would have the earrings by then, and she would figure out the power of the earrings and all that. And I think that was the biggest missed thing. When you're doing something creative, don't like wait.
You have to
You know,
jump right in.
You have
yeah.
to jump right into the story that people want and need. And he instead was like, oh no, we'll draw this out. We'll get 3 movies. We'll get 5 movies. I don't know why he thought that, but
I think like
I
even
think
like
that's,
Twilight has to be 2 different movies for one book.
But he could have had one successful movie if he
Yeah,
would have
yeah.
done. But then
Successful, even.
I think it's like spot on, and I know last year we were talking about it, like, I think it would have been, it could have been the same storyline, but just in reverse. I think it would have been so much better if it had just been, like, I don't know if anyone watches, like, How to Get Away with Murder. Like, in the beginning of the show, they'll show kind of, like, the end of the episode, but, like, and then it's, like, 24 hours later, and then it kind of recaps what just happened. Like, I think it would have been better almost if, like, the first part of the movie was this big blow up, or like this whole thing with like the Misfits and the holograms, and you're like, what do they possibly do? Like, why do they hate him so much? And then it was like 6 months earlier, you know, and then, but you at least had those first 10, 15 minutes or whatever to establish kind of the current relationship with the holograms and the Misfits, and then get more into the backstory. I feel like that was, and they brought in Kesha to play Pizzazz. Like, that's no small feat. And Juliette Lewis and Molly Ringwald. So I think it was just a little discoordinated.
I think if the characters had been older, the coming of who you are angst wouldn't need it to be as much of a focus, and there would have been room for the Misfits in the first movie.
Yeah.
Something that really bothered me about the movie was the treatment of the character Rio. The fact that they had him be the owner of Starlight, and that took away an entire aspect of the girl power of the original.
Absolutely. No, I agree.
He's the band, he's her boss.
Yeah.
He's also older than her, which is also creepy, seeing as he's now her boss.
Yeah. I think that's a spot on point, because the whole reason why, you know, Chrissy just did such a phenomenal job with the scripts, with the original show. The whole reason Jerrica Benton got involved with Starlight Music, and it was to get money for Starlight House because the plumbing was messed up, you know, and it was to take care of the kids and the girls and the Starlight girls, and there was kind of, you know.
And the company was owned by her father.
Yeah, it was owned by her father, and it was just, you know, so there were enough things, but not, you know, a few missing ingredients, I think, is what the consensus is.
I think just beyond sort of, and I'm just working this thought in my head right now,
Uh-huh.
I think beyond Jem, the movie had a few missing ingredients. I think it's an important failure, and maybe we just need to accept that a live action movie is not a good vehicle for the content that makes Jem so special. And hearing, hear me out, because I think hearing how the creators of the Jem comic are so immersed with the fans that they reference the original creators, and they're able to do a lot more diverse, interesting content. We have to be real with the culture that we live in now. Doesn't support movies with that kind of content that are mass marketed. There is no movie that has people of color, LGBT folks, female-led fashion icon performers that are business owners that almost die every episode. Like, it just doesn't exist, and I think it's more special to maintain this as sort of like a niche thing. And I was talking to Allie after the previous panel. I think that we don't talk enough about how, for example, Jem and the fashions and the attitude and how much it's influenced drag culture and LGBT culture, and how there's this whole YouTube thing about jizz that really takes the absurdity of the cartoon and it goes all the way to the point where it's offensive sometimes, but it really like actually plays into the spirit of what makes the original so special. And I very hard to find anything mainstream that even comes close to the content that the 80s cartoon even had.
I think that's a great point too, and I know Christy even talked about this at JemCon a few years ago. What would be, and she had a script kind of in her head about what, if she were to do a movie today, what it would look like. But she said to go and have a movie that's true to Jem in the 80s, and just even the architecture, to have it be authentic to the 80s. And she talked about the cost aspect associated with that, and having it be, you know, a lot has changed in the last 30 years, and just keeping it authentic with the costumes and the buildings and, you know, all that stuff that I never thought about until she mentioned that. So it definitely, I agree with what Mike said. I think they did the best they could with what they had. They also, you know, from my understanding, they were allocated, they got the approval to go forward with the script, and they were given a certain budget. And they were trying, I think, to get more money, but it was kind of like move forward with what you have, or kind of turn in your deck of cards and you're risking getting something better or having it get cut, basically. Because then it also goes back to earlier in the presentation, looking at all those active and live requests. You know, you kind of have to sometimes make do with what you have. We are running a little over, which is fine. This is a great discussion. And then also, some of the current stuff, this was a lot of stuff that came out around the same year as the movie. So it was really interesting with the merchandise. You can kind of see, so this is all Jem stuff. There were some pajamas that came out at Target. I know there were some pajamas that came out in Sears in Canada.
They put out new pajamas at Walmart too.
There's now?
Yes.
What?
Yeah, like there's a new nightshirt.
Oh my. We have like the karaoke machine, and I know a lot of people were saying they would have bought the karaoke machine if it had the original Jem logo and not the movie logo.
It's not very good quality.
But
But the lights are cool.
Yeah.
we bought, like, and then
I've been to a disco ball.
and then there's like the Manic Panic hair dye, and like I remember I went into Sephora and asked about the Jem and the Holograms makeup, and like the manager like had no idea what I was talking about. Like, so obviously they didn't do a good job of communicating that, you know, this is new merchandise that came out. And so it was very and it's a little all over the place. I mean,
they didn't even use the same logo for the movie that they used for all of the vintage products. It seems like you would cross market and use the same logo.
Well, yeah, so it's interesting. They had like the children's clothing line at Target. They had random like intermittent juniors and women clothing also at Target. Then they had the really upscale clothing line at Shopbot, which was a really high price point, and a lot of that was based on the movie. They had the Sephora makeup line that actually did really well, and it sold out. They had the Manic Panic hair dye. So you have kind of, I think they were trying to test the waters. You know, they had the really high price points with like the Shopbot clothing and and even the Sephora makeup wasn't cheap, you know. But then you also had the kind of the lower price point mass merchandise type thing with the clothing and Target. And so I think they were trying to just cover as many bases as possible. But also I think they were holding off on, I think what their vision was is that the movie would do really well, and then they'd have all this merchandise out to support the movie. And then the movie didn't end up doing well, and then I think they kind of cut back on licensed merchandise because they thought, oh, people aren't interested in Jem. And it wasn't that, no, people aren't interested in Jem, it's they weren't interested in the movie. So I think that's where, again, that's why the slide says scattered efforts, too little, too late.
But also the marketing, I feel like I was waiting for, I work at Hot Topic, and I was waiting for the Manic Panic Jem, like, dye to be there. Because I'm like, that would have been perfect. We already sell Manic Panic, and it would be like the perfect store. And I was like, come on.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the biggest thing about the Manic Panic line was they already had these colors in existence, and they didn't create new ones for Gem, but they slapped the Gem logo on it and upped it by $2 or something like that.
Yeah.
And so everybody was like, well, if you want them, just get the cheaper one without the logo.
Aww. Yeah, so it's very interesting to kind of just look at, and it's very kind of reminding me a little bit of what we saw earlier with the packaging from the toy line in the 80s. It's, you know, they're trying to kind of really figure out the brand identity and what's going to work, and a lot of it is speculation. So just kind of wanna try to you know, wrap it up a bit. You know, a lot of people are talking about like, oh, that's not Gem, or, you know, whether it was the movie or not liking the body types in the comics. You know, there's the one thing, you know, that's for certain is there's a lot of love related to Gem, and, you know, the fans are, you know, diehard, and we really love Gem, and that's where a lot of this controversy and passion, you know, comes from. But, you know, at the end of the day, a lot of people saying, oh, that's not Gem, you know, whatever. The reality is, this is, you know, the Gem from 30 years ago versus today. You know, things have changed a bit, and I just kind of want to conclude with saying, you know, we're all Gem. You know, we have newer people now coming in, bringing in their kids. Some of you remember, they're going to be here next year. I'm so excited. Leilani and Aurora May, the two little ones in the front with Sam. Their mom, Jenny, watched Gem as a kid growing up, and now she's getting her kids into Gem. You know, so we all are fans of Gem, and we all love Gem in our own way. You know, and that's really kind of what I'd like to end the presentation on, is just, you know, stay true to the essence of Gem, being inclusive. You know, by all means, you can have your different opinions on what you like or what you don't like, but really, we're all Gem.
We're all Gem.
Yeah.